Welcome to our podcast series, Groundbreaking Conversations. Today's topic is Building an Infrastructure of Peace. I'm Naila Chowdhury, co-founder of Pillars for Dignity. We are doing this podcast in partnership with Destination Peace today. P4D is a nonprofit organization supporting underserved women and girls who face social and economic challenges. Our commitment to give them economic empowerment, dignity, and sustainability through life skill trainings, technology trainings, Lotus credit programs with access to finance, housing, health, and well-being. Looking at the present condition of the world, there's a deep healing needed and critical work to be done in this country and globally in building infrastructure of peace in the face of racism, xenophobia that is on the rise. We are firmly committed to continue the fight for racial justice, peace, and creating opportunities for the underserved women and girls, regardless of their race, gender, or their income. With that, I would like to warmly welcome our esteemed moderator. I'm privileged and humbled to introduce Emanuel C. Perlman. Manny is a performing artist, cleric, spiritual leader, and an international ambassador for peace. He's the founder and CEO of Destination Peace. The organization's mission is to create harmony through the world using the universal language of music. They're determined to transcend differences in religious affiliation and in culture to resolve conflict and bring people together. Manny travels the world as a transformative change agent, sharing the message of peace through music. Manny has performed globally in renowned venues that include the United States Capitol, Windsor Castle, St. George's Hall in Liverpool, and the United Nations headquarters. Manny, the session is yours.
Thank you, Naila. When you are hungry, if food is available, you can end your starvation. When methodologies are available to end frustration and conflict and the anger it creates, violence disappears. We begin our groundbreaking conversation about peace with Dr. Salk. Dr. Peter Salk graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard University and Alpha Omega Alpha from Johns Hopkins Medical Center. Together with his father, Dr. Jonas Salk, they conducted research on the biology and immunotherapy of cancer and autoimmune disease and strategies for vaccine production, and a project to develop an inactivated vaccine for HIV infection, and the introduction of AIDS treatment programs in Africa and Asia. As president of the Jonas Salk Legacy Foundation, he has been educating the public regarding his father's work and life and helping to extend and apply his father's vision for addressing humanity's ongoing challenges and opportunities, particularly in the realms of vaccines, global health, and improving the prospects of a sustainable human future, including building and sustaining peace. He has been a professor in the Department of Infectious Diseases and Microbiology at the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Public Health since 2015. 4 years ago, Naila Chowdhury and I were present at Peter's spellbinding United Nations presentation, where he said these words: "In this age, we need to deal with cooperation, not competition." He passionately spoke about the need to make fundamental changes and how to create a win-win scenario. Peter, why is there conflict? What perpetuates it? And how do we fix it?
Thank you, Manny. It's good to be here. My father was interested not only in dealing with matters having to do with the diseases caused by infectious agents and so on. He was also concerned with what happens when people don't relate to each other in the optimal way. This was a main theme for him. And I think that what we have to realize is that what we see in the world today in terms of human relationships is not always what's optimal in terms of our capacity as human beings. In the same way, Manny, I'll get more to the point of your question, but I just wanted to give this background. In the same way that we've been able to deal with infectious diseases through an understanding of the deep principles about how we are able to create immunity to protect ourselves against external diseases, being able to understand what drives us from our core, what our core capacities are in terms of behavior that is not so good and behavior that is constructive and that can enable a building of an infrastructure of peace. So knowledge of the details of what goes on inside is very important. My own vantage point is that what creates violence, what creates misunderstanding is a narrowness of boundaries of our consciousness. We shut in to ourselves. We shut into our immediate sphere of family, of relationships, and we can very easily close our eyes to and our hearts to what is going on in what we might be able to see as other than us. What's very important, I believe, in terms of creating an infrastructure of peace is expanding the boundaries of our awareness so that we begin to see others in the same way that we see ourselves, feel and experience the needs and the inner experience of others as we would ourselves. To do this adequately, it takes education, both from an external point of view, learning about things, but perhaps even more important, how we can understand and experience the deep, quiet levels of our own inner being, and through that, expand our comprehension. I can say more, but that's sort of the nugget from my vantage point.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for continuing the legacy of your father and explaining it on such another level. Thank you so much. Our next panelist is Dr. Yozawitz. Dr. Allan Yozawitz is board certified in clinical neuropsychology by the American Board of Professional Psychology and the American Academy of Clinical Neuropsychology. He maintains a private practice in Syracuse, New York, and a faculty appointment as an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Upstate Medical University. He also holds a faculty appointment as an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Psychology at Syracuse University. Until his retirement from public service, Dr. Yozawitz was director of neuropsychology at Hutchings Psychiatric Center for 26 years. Dr. Yozawitz was director of continuing education for the International Neuropsychological Society for 9 years. Served on the editorial board of 3 neuropsychology journals. He is past president of the New York State Association of Neuropsychology. During his term as president, he spearheaded the legislative initiative that established mandatory continuing education for psychologists throughout New York State. For decades, I have marveled how Allan can simplify intractable Gordian knot issues and dissect with laser-like precision intransigent problems, including the elusive out-of-grasp solutions to peaceful coexistence. Same question, Allan. Why is there conflict? What perpetuates it? And how do we fix it?
Thank you, Manny, for that glorious introduction. And I've enjoyed our interactions over the decades and found it inspiring as you bring clerical perspective and godlike meaning into the world. Aggression is something that we don't only see on a national level or at a global level. It begins in the home. It begins in closed environments, begins with the individual. has a lot to do with parenting, but what it has in common is need. Need creates in individuals who have no other capacity to satisfy their need an impulsive response to collect and satisfy that need, to collect what's missing, whether it be food, whether it be prestige. We see it in individuals. Depression is based on a lack of self-esteem. Children who are depressed don't describe themselves like adults who are depressed. They don't talk about lack of energy, problems with sleep, and the other vegetative signs of depression. They express it in terms of violence. They become conduct disordered. I often will evaluate children, and I see stacks and stacks of disciplinary referrals. These children get punished, they get suspended, they are treated the same way after each aggressive act to no avail. You would think that if it works, it would work and fix the problem. But the problem stems from what's lacking within them in self-esteem. And when we define them as having oppositional defiant disorder, well, they attack individuals who have self-esteem. They try to develop attention to themselves that's lacking, even if it's negative attention, it's attention. They're often brought up by parents who don't address their needs adequately, and any kind of recognition that they exist is a positive. So, for example, they will, if people are hungry, they're going to go to a place where food is available. They'll attack the grocery store. Well, if they're hungry for self-esteem, they'll attack the most prestigious individuals they can find, whether it be parents, whether it be teachers, whether it be principals. And so the best way to address that is to give them what's needed. If people are hungry and they're storming the food stores, you can put up people with rifles on the tops of buildings and shoot them, or lock the food stores so that they can't get in. But that doesn't really solve the problem. The way to solve the problem is to give them the food that they're seeking, and then they're not going to attack the food stores. So if children who are aggressive or adults who are aggressive are in need not only of self-esteem, but of economic recognition, if they feel disenfranchised, we need to give them what they're lacking. We need to recognize what's missing. And what Peter was just saying is, to simplify what Peter was saying, basically we need to teach people to put themselves into the shoes of other people, to see how their behavior is perceived by others, and to understand the need states of these individuals. So if we can see what these people are missing, what they're lacking, what their needs are, that is a way to attenuate and to stop the violence before it escalates.
Thank you for sharing your insights, Allan. Our third panelist is Mr. Julian Caletti. Whereas Drs. Salk and Yozawitz build infrastructures from the past to the future, Julian Caletti molds the wisdom of such builders and infuses it into his training future global leaders. Julian is an expert on the United Nations systems, protocols, and practicalities. He is primarily responsible for the United Nations immersion and training programs for young future leaders. Additionally, Julian is the instructor and facilitator for the United Nations Institute Training and Research Program that deals with the Human Rights Commission, the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, and the intricacies of the United Nations. I was fortunate to meet Julian at the first virtually accessible UNITAR course designed to coincide with the 46th Annual Human Rights Council session in Geneva this past March. Julian highly motivates people with his vast knowledge and deep compassion and commitment for human rights and the advancement of global peace. Julian, why is there conflict? What perpetuates it? And how do we fix it?
Thanks so much, Emanuel, for this introduction and that global compassion that you are talking about. can only give it back to you. That's how I got to know you in this UNITAR course on human rights. Greetings from Geneva, everybody. I'm glad to be here. And if I want to address these questions, actually very similar to the answer of Allan, perhaps not as deep, but the key cause of conflict I see on an individual level are negative emotions, such as anger, fear, frustration, perhaps sometimes even an excessive pride, right? And now I come from an international relations background. I have perceived over the years that actually international relations is very similar to human relations, since states or other international actors are run by human beings. Hence, you can actually make the direct connection between these individual sources of conflict, in a way, negative emotions, to those sources of conflict on the global level between countries or other conflicting parties, right? Negative emotions, fear, frustration, aggression, greed, grievances, or the excessive pride, nationalism, right? That is, in my view, and I come from Germany and we have our own experience in the past with nationalism. This is the cancer of international politics. In any event, how can we now understand a little bit more of the logic of conflict? There's a great painting in the Palace of Nations here in Geneva. And Emanuel knows it, I have described it to him in the course. It's called The Vicious Circle of War. And to the left, they are the conquerors. They are marching and celebrating with their flags. They have won the war and they celebrate it. And to the right, they are the conquered. There are dead bodies lying there, but also the survivors. And the noteworthy thing about that painting is that the survivors put their fists into the sky and scream. So that is the painter's message. That's the vicious circle of war. The survivors, they will gain their strength again, and as soon as they can, they will attack the conquerors again. And that will lead to the next war, which produces conquerors and conquered. And that will all go over and over again. And this logic of you hit me, I hit you back. You insult me, I insult you back. This logic is what in my eyes drives conflicts from small to large all around the world. There's a nice quote I want to share with you by Gandhi. Gandhi once said, "An eye for an eye and the world will be blind." So that is really, in my view, what we should avoid. How do we get out of this vicious circle of war? It's really difficult. And even on a personal level, you know, if you are trapped in a conflict with a colleague or with your spouse or whatever it is, how difficult it is to just stop and self-reflect and stop pointing with a finger at the other. Always know that while you do that, there are always 3 fingers that point at yourself. So whenever you're trapped in such a conflict, whether it's on an individual or on a global level, it's the pause and the reflection, the self-reflection about one's own blind spots that is needed. And if you can, reverse that logic and do good to those that are doing bad to you, then you have, in my eyes, reached the highest level of conflict resolution in that sense.
Thank you, Julian. One of the things that you give to so many is hope, because you do teach future leaders and you'll dispel a lot of the angst in people just by showing up and being present. And what you just said is so profoundly appreciated. So I'm going to begin with you in reverse order of the questioning. So Julian, there are inoculations against viruses, but how do we inoculate people against violence?
I can again only mirror what has been said before. I mean, Peter, I think, was it that has talked about education, right? And expanding the boundaries of one's understanding. I can absolutely second that, exactly. There's the quote by UNESCO, the UN Organization on Education, Science and Culture. The grounding, the constitution of UNESCO actually says, as war begins in the minds of people, it's also in the minds of people that defenses to peace have to be built. So education of the minds is a key point in this, obviously, to inoculate people against violence. Learn about conflicts in the world, international relations, countries that have been fighting for each other for decades, if not centuries. Learn that, understand the dynamic behind it. And then obviously the education of the heart as well. That should not be forgotten either. When we talk about emotions that we all experience, it's really important, especially if you find yourself in such a vicious circle of war or conflict, to realize that, wait a second, what you are feeling right now is anger. Where does it come from? What you are feeling right now is fear. And where does it come from? And the need that Allan was speaking about, right? If you are able, when you're trapped in such a dynamic, if you are able to pause and self-reflect and find yourself, wait a second, I'm experiencing that emotion right now. And could it be that it contributes actually to the conflict? That requires a great, education of the heart. So that's, in my view, what can be done. It's really educating the youth, and put these ideas of peace into the minds, but especially into the hearts of people.
Thank you, Julian. Allan, the same question. There are inoculations against viruses, but how do we inoculate people against violence?
We need to recognize that schools and parenting have a major influence upon the structures, the emotional structures that get built. And for too long, both parents and schools focus on left hemispheric treatment, basically teaching kids reading, writing, and arithmetic, but not about emotionality. We need to teach kids how to respect themselves and respect others, how to appreciate differences rather than bullying people. If people feel good about themselves, they're not going to bully and mock people with disabilities and other problems, or people that appear different from them. It's really important that we develop compassion and understanding, which are the structures, the pillars of peace. Architects can build buildings with design, and we already have the design in place for how to build structures of peace, but we don't employ it. So we can vaccinate people with ways to inoculate them against aggression, but we don't do that. And we talk a lot, we give a lot of lip service to our children, but we don't put the money and the effort into it. Psychologists are basically addressing older individuals in rehab centers, in prisons, but not in the schools at an early age. We can identify those people in preschool and in kindergarten who are going to be the aggressors, who are going to be leading to eventually to mass violence, who are going to come in and kill people in shopping centers and movie theaters. We can identify those problems early on, but we don't have the personnel in place to do that early on. We need to reorganize the way we educate children, not only in the schools, but parenting. When we enroll children in preschool, we need to enroll parents in preschool. Basically, to vote, you have to pass a test. To become an American citizen, you have to pass a test. To drive, you have to pass a test. But to parent a child, there's no test. And home economics doesn't teach you how to be a parent. We need to incorporate that kind of structure into schools and recognize that peace and building human empathy is a scientific construct. We need to employ the science. We have that science, it's just not employed. We employed science such that we are very different from our ancestors in the Middle Ages, but emotionally, we're no different than our ancestors. We still engage in conflict. The only difference is the tools that we use. Instead of arrows and rocks, we use atomic weapons and weapons with microchips. But we need to recognize that our understanding of human behavior hasn't advanced at all close to what our technological advances are. We have the capacity to do that. We need to educate people about the need to educate parents, to start at that early stage of pre-kindergarten, preschool. We need to build in and put money into the kind of training programs that need to exist in the schools so that they have training and parenting within the schools as well. And I'll stop there and we'll address more things later.
Thank you, Allan. And Peter, who better to ask a question about inoculations? How do we inoculate people against violence?
With inoculations against diseases, we have to understand, how does the immune system work? Back in the 14th century, that was not understood. We had the plague, which reduced the population in Europe by around 1/3. We did not at that point have the knowledge and capacity to intervene in the way we do today. Today, we've seen what's happened with this pandemic. We have a deep understanding of how the immune system works, of the technologies to create vaccines, and we've been able to take those significant steps on an individual level, and also understanding what's necessary in theory, in general, for how to get enough people vaccinated that there will be a significant change in the course of this pandemic. The same thing with individuals. We have to understand how is our nervous system structured? What is the nature? What is our own nature as beings in this world? And on the basis of that understanding how nature is structured at its depths, to be able to intervene on an individual level, as Allan has been talking about, and then also on a collective level. So I think what's so very important is to begin to look at, how is nature structured at its depths? Who are we? We think about these things, and Manny, you know this so intimately, from a religious vantage point. Many of us do. Others think, as I tend to, from a scientific vantage point. And here's the question. What if, on an individual level, we do have an inner basis of peace, that we are able to tap into using our minds? We're trained in school to use our minds in an outward level. What if we were trained to use our minds on an inward level, to explore our own inner structure, our consciousness, and discover within us an infinite basis of peace in our behavior, our experience, our understanding, which, because of the repeat experience of this kind of training, then being able to bring that peaceful experience out into the world in our own behavior. So that's the first what if. And what if, on a collective level, it were to turn out that nature is structured at its deepest levels in such a way that our own individual consciousness is not only our own, but it's also exactly the same as the consciousness, the subjective experience of everyone else. And what if it were to turn out that by exploring this on an individual level, and particularly doing so within large groups, there might be an ability to create an influence of peace at this deepest level of nature, which spreads to everyone else in the environment, because everyone's consciousness is grounded in that level. I'll leave that as a question and we can discuss things further.
Thank you, Peter. Naila, throughout your life, from a young child in Bangladesh to your involvement at the United Nations, you have courageously championed for women and girls. Now that you're continuing that noble work with Farah Ahmed at Pillars for Dignity, would you disclose to us an instance when, as a direct result of your involvement, you achieved significant change?
Thank you for asking, Manny. I would go back a decade, I would say, of my experience with extreme poverty in a country where there's now almost 170 million people, and out of which more than half the population are women and girls, and out of that 30% are below poverty line, extreme poverty. And with due respect to all the speakers, it is so true that when we were addressing extreme poverty in the villages where there was no electricity and how to empower women, I realized that they can do without food, they can do without many things, but what struck me the most was poverty of mind. And how do we address that? With the poverty of mind, I realized that that's where the violence triggers off. That's where unrest starts off and the peace goes off from community and family and individual. When we address them with access to finance and technology, we managed to empower almost 8 million women, and I saw their lifestyle change. When they get hope, there's much more harmony in the family, to community, to villages. And if you all are not aware, this led to my mentor getting Nobel Peace Prize in 2006, Muhammad Yunus. I was privileged to work side by side with him for almost 12 years in the Village Phone Project, which has made me a better person. But fast forwarding this whole thing, when I came to US, which was pretty late, but I realized an advanced country like US has similar situations with women and underserved women and girls, especially I would say the South Asian and immigrants and the Native Americans. Nothing is different. And that was a wake-up call for me. And we kept on thinking that, what do we do? That's how the dream, and I think the stars aligned with me and Farah Ahmed, with the angel investor, we thought of Pillars for Dignity, where Manny is also very much involved with it. We are trying to support women get social credit. Our whole thought is, no matter what we do, everything goes hand in hand: access to finance, dignity, peace, economic empowerment. That's where the shift will take place for a different world, a world where there's equal opportunity. And like all of you know, the pandemic has really impacted women and girls much more than anything. We've fallen behind on our commitment to UN 17 sustainable goal. We've gone behind with the pandemic. And who's the worst impacted? It's the women and girls. Domestic violence has multiplied. Economic disparity has multiplied. They're the one worst hit. Gender equity has been hit below, much below than we have ever imagined. So our humble effort to bring in social credit into the community and support the unbankable women and girls of US and then outside to start off social business. And our whole focus would be socially and economically grow one woman and girl at a time, improve their self-worth, dignity, self-esteem, and living without dependence on charity. How do we give them the dignity of life? Thank you, Manny.
Thank you, Naila.
I do have to mention something over here. While doing this, I have to say thank you to our compassionate investors who do good with their investment by giving these money and investing on the women while doing good to themselves along with it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Naila, for always being a source of inspiration and a source of change. And finally, our brief group discussion. How do we build up an immunity to violence? What role does parenting and experience play in an individual's aggressivity? And on a national level, what role does political leadership and national culture play in a nation's aggressivity?
Well, Manny, I already addressed some of that in terms of parenting, and basically national leadership is a form of parenting. I think aggression can be halted if one is in the position of the other to recognize the person being hurt by the aggression, the empathy that is an antidote to aggression. If you understand the sanctity of human life, you're not going to be dismembering bodies, killing people, because if you have the capacity to think that you're killing a child, someone's child, you know, that life is sacred. And that kind of understanding of the basic human compassionate basis of social behavior begins at home. And so you can't just achieve peace through power of negotiation or through reconciliation at a peace conference or a table. It begins in small steps. It begins by training people. The media has a significant effect upon training people. I don't think we'd be able to achieve the racial understanding and integration that we've achieved in this country and that has been achieved elsewhere if it wasn't for media. Television, The Cosby Show had a tremendous impact upon looking at Black individuals as middle-class citizens and giving the Cosby character a profession of being a physician. and the LGBT commercials and movies have a profound influence on public understanding. It becomes part of the culture. And that influences parents who then influence their children. So there needs to be a movement to work on problem resolution rather than violence. The violence that exists on television is profound in terms of promoting violence. Dorothy Otno-Lewis, a famous psychologist from NYU, did a lot of research showing that children who become violent are witnessing violence in the home. They mirror what goes on. You teach your children not just by what you say, but what you do. You're role models for your children. So if they watch you handle conflict in an aggressive manner, they're going to incorporate that into their behavior pattern. So we need to, when we educate parents, not only on how to raise a child, but how to deal with conflict resolution. Again, we have an armamentarium of scientific research that shows what works and what doesn't work. We haven't distributed. So it's sort of like getting back to the vaccine analogy. We've got the vaccine. We just have to put it into arms. And we have the vaccine against violence. We just haven't distributed it, and we need to distribute it. And that's where the media comes in to play in terms of distribution. And educating parents is a way of distributing the vaccine against violence into the way child rearing is done in this country. So, need alone doesn't result in outcome. Need, for example, to fix the COVID-19 epidemic or to invent the electric light bulb because we were in darkness didn't result in success. What resulted in success was building upon the science by incorporating what other people have done in small steps. Jonas Salk, when he invented the polio vaccine, built upon research that was done not only by him, but by others as well. Edison, who invented the electric light bulb, built upon the work of others. And so what we need to do is recognize that there is a science out there, and we need to implement and build upon that science, develop new structures, new approaches. But again, it's a problem of distribution, of getting that into the public, not just having it, but getting it into the public.
Anyone else want to tackle that?
Let me just add one thing. There was this great television program in the 1950s. So most people who are listening to this podcast probably aren't aware of that, but you can Google it. It's a Twilight Zone episode, and it's called The Eye of the Beholder. And basically, it's some woman who's going through plastic surgery repeatedly because she's her appearance is so distasteful to others that they keep trying to modify it. And you don't see the doctors throughout the whole episode, you just see the patient. They finally take the bandages off, and according to our standards, the woman is gorgeous. And then they move the camera to the physicians who are doing the surgery, and they all look like hogs or pigs and disgusting looking individuals by our standards, but that's the social norm. So we have to train people that just because someone looks different, sounds different, has a different color skin, different orientation sexually or whatever, they're different from us, that doesn't mean that they're less equal to us, that they're not equal to us, that they should be reprehensible or deemed undesirable and cast off. So it's all social norms that establish what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And we need to expand tolerance for people that are different than us. The reason that bullying occurs is because we feel that if we group together and attack someone who's different, it's going to enhance our self-esteem. And if you have a lot of self-esteem, you don't need to enhance your self-esteem. And that comes from parenting. I'll stop there.
Manny?
Yes.
This is Peter, and I would love to make a few points following what Allan has just had to say. So tell me whether...
Please.
Okay, good. there are ways that have been developed over many years to help people experience the deeper levels of their own being. We're used to the scientific advances of the contemporary era, but there are things that we can draw from the past. There are many different programs now that are being looked at in educational settings, for example. There's mindfulness programs, there are other programs. What I'm most familiar with on a personal level is transcendental meditation. For example, just looking at the TM, or Transcendental Meditation Program, which has been introduced in educational systems at many different levels. There's a quiet time program that has been introduced in San Francisco and other places in the country, which has had profound effects, not only for the individual students, better academic performance, less stress in their lives, but also in the collective environment of the schools where behavior improves on a collective level. And the superintendent of the San Francisco Unified School System remarked that with our education today, we teach children about everything except themselves. So that is one form of intervention that we might want to explore in helping to create more peaceful individuals. On a collective level, there are interventions that have been explored, again, with transcendental meditation, looking at the practice in large numbers, in large groups, with the prediction that there would be an effect measurable through scientific means on the surrounding society and with enough people together, even on a global scale. Research has been done and published which supports that notion. As an example, there was an experiment done in the 1980s and seeing that over a period of time, around 10% of the time when large groups were in place, either close at hand or far away globally, there was a significant progress towards peace in that country, not because people were thinking about it, but because they were having an effect that just spread on a deeper level. So, and there are more recent experiments within this country of a period of time when there was a large group in place and parameters of violent behavior decreased, parameters of supportive health increased. I think this is something that we really need to look at as a society. And Julian, in terms of the United Nations and what kinds of intervention programs could be added to everything else that's being done to create a groundwork of peacefulness that spreads a reduction of stress in not only individuals, but in our national and our global society. So that's a direction that I think would be worth adding to the equation.
Thank you. Thank you. Julian?
Thank you, Peter and Allan. It's exciting for me to hear different perspectives. I'm not so used to the neuropsychological perspective on things or the health perspective on things. I'm more like the political scientist or the history perspective on things from my own background. But it's really interesting and also food for thought for me on how to build up more training programs in the United Nations. One thing I could relate very much with was what Naila said when Naila described working with Muhammad Yunus. Muhammad Yunus, I had also the great luck to see him once. He came to Geneva and delivered a lecture to us when we were still at university in 2014. And an inspiring political leader. I mean, he, after the event, he stayed on stage and all the students came to him to take selfies with him and be with him. And he really bathed in the people and showed himself so accessible. And that's just an inspiration, And I would tackle Manny's question on the political leaders or cultures and how they can contribute to a more peaceful world. I would tackle that exactly with individuals like him. That's just an inspiration. People that bring this peacefulness, in their own personality out and share that with young students like us at the time, That was absolutely stunning to see this. I could also mention one case of international relations, which is my favorite case because it also affects, or it's related to myself. I have an Italian last name because my father comes from Argentina, but I'm actually German, born and raised in Germany. Now, what better example to have two blood enemies over decades and centuries that finally made peace and became the powerhouse of Europe, then my own home country in France. Who could have told in 1900 or even in 1945 that Germany and France would once work together so closely and contribute to so much prosperity around it, you know, in Europe and even in the world, I would say. People would have said, you're absolutely crazy if you think these arch enemies would one day work together. And it happened. And it's amazing. And it's great from my personal perspective as well, because my great-grandfather died in World War I in the fight against France. My grandfather, he didn't die in the fight against France in World War II, but he was there as well. And now us, young generation of Germans, we are the ones that actually have school exchange with France at the age of 15. We are learning French in our school. It's mandatory. When I was 15, I was sent to France. 2 weeks in a French guest family. They were the best in whole France. I love them. I'm still in touch with them. And then the young French students came to us. You know, these kind of things, that's on an individual level, but actually that requires political leadership. It's actually the leaders of Europe after World War II, Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, you know, Konrad Adenauer and the likes, Willy Brandt on the side of Germany, that made this happen. That said, let's forget about our bloody history and work together. And it's and that is the best example of two countries that hated each other to the guts work together now. And if France and Germany made it as they have done now, and it's good for everybody involved, then other countries can do so as well. If you look around in the world, you know, other fighting parties with each other, it can't be as bad as Germany and France was, you know. So if they even made it, others can do it too. That gives me great hope.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous.
The Pillars for Dignity and Destination Peace monthly groundbreaking conversations relate to such topics as peace, mental health, effective politics, analyzing global media coverage, and an informative hour with historians. Pillars for Dignity and Destination Peace strives to leave behind a legacy for future generations where no one will be left behind. Today's groundbreaking conversations broadcast is the first of monthly presentations with highly esteemed speakers deeply committed to the welfare of others. Thank you to Peter Salk, Allan Yozawitz, and Julian Caletti for presenting innovative approaches to deal with conflict that results in violence. It is an honor to partner with Pillars for Dignity and Naila Chowdhury. Her life experience and commitment to women and girls is exemplary. And thank you to our listening audience for being with us. We hope that if we didn't inoculate you, that we gave you a booster shot. So Naila.
Thank you. The session was simply extraordinary. Manny and all the speakers, you all are legend by your own right, and I'm humbled to be part of it. It was extraordinary. And for all the listeners, thank you for being there. We have to stay safe. There's so much to do. Know that we care for you. And to all the listeners, if you want to tune into the podcast, keep a watch on our social media and tune into Spotify, iTunes, Google, Apple Podcast. And if you want to contact us, email us at info@pillarsfordignity.org. With this, I want you to know together we are stronger. Thank you very much.